Hello, everyone. This is Amy Brown, Director of Events and Education for Trade Press Media Group and Building Operating Management and Facility Maintenance Decisions. Thank you for joining us for today's webcast, Stormwater Notices of Violations, How to Respond, Act, and Prevent. Our presenter today is Jeff Urban. Jeff has over 8 years of water resource management experience, working directly with some of the largest retailers and property management groups in the United States for its stormwaters and lift station solutions. Jeff's first experience in the facility maintenance world provided solutions to regulatory stormwater NOVs. He has experience throughout the country with some unique demands and requirements at this local and state level. Jeff's educational background is in the finance and sustainability, which has proven to be a good match for the facility maintenance world, as facility managers strive to balance cost, value, compliance, and eco-friendly solutions where possible. Today's learning objectives include learning about common stormwater violations that lead to an NOV, discover how to address an NOV, including how to respond, what steps to take, what penalties you could face if not addressed. And finally, learn about preventative measures to ensure that an NOV will never be issued at your property or a property you manage ever again. Before we get started, I'd like just to go over a few details about today's webcast. A live question and answer session will follow today's formal presentation. To submit your questions, please navigate to the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and type in your questions. Jeff will answer as many questions as time permits. At the conclusion of today's webcast, you'll receive a PDF copy of the slides used today. You'll also receive a link to a brief online assessment. Upon successful completion of this assessment, you'll receive your CEU transcript that can be used to self-report to any local agency or association that you need to earn professional development credits. Today's webcast will also be archived at facilitiesnet.com/webcasts. That's it for the business end of the presentation, and I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Amy. I hope everybody can hear me all right and everybody's doing well today. I know given the year we've all had in 2020, I hope everybody's healthy and everybody's family is healthy and everybody's doing well no matter where you're located. I am up here in the great state of Minnesota. Again, as Amy pointed out, I started basically my stormwater path in the desert Southwest in Arizona, managing basically an operations office we had out there. Kind of got the firsthand experience dealing with NOVs and experience in stormwater, starting again in the desert Southwest. Now I'm up here in Minnesota where it is full on fall. We've got wind today and beautiful colors and leaves blowing everywhere. So again, I hope everybody's well and excited to present to you today. So thanks for joining. Really my path, again, starting in operations and now in more of a account management and sales position, really gave me a good start in understanding, our audience, who are property management, property managers, program managers, owners of property, and dealing with NOVs directly. So I have a good understanding of the challenge that each of you are presented with balancing, budgets and spend for your properties and basically making sure those dollars go a long way to keep things functional, keep things, if it's customers going into your stores or if it's residents at your HOAs, make sure everybody's safe and keep the flow of things going. So I understand the challenge it prevents, and we want to make sure we spend those dollars wisely and get a lot of value for what we're doing. So hopefully at the end of this presentation, you'll have some good takeaways and learn how to avoid NOVs. And if you ever were to get one, you'll have some steps and good clarity on what to do if that happens. Quick funny story, NOVs will always be kind of near and dear to my heart. As I started in Arizona, I grew up in the Midwest, moved out there and then took on a position in the stormwater realm. And one of the first assignments I had was to deal with a large customer of ours down there on an NOV. They got a letter basically stating that okay, you've got a pond out there and it's never been maintained and it's overgrown and we need that cleared out and taken care of. So managing the office, I was able to, have a great idea of jumping in with the crews. I'm going to lead by example, get out there and help these crews take care of it. It's in the middle of summer in Arizona, about 190 degrees, or it felt like it. And, but I'm going to jump in and give the crew some, if anything, some motivation while we're out there, trying to get this cleared out and get the customer taken care of with the local municipality. And I learned firsthand what the desert fauna and flora is all about out there. I realized that, the obvious things like cactus and other things like that definitely have some pricklies on them, but so does just about every other plant that grows in Arizona. Even the grass seems like it runs into your legs and your arms. And so I got a real quick education on the types of vegetation our crews run into out there. And another quick part of this, why I always remember it, is as I'm clearing some of these areas out for our bigger machines to get in there, I kept hearing some strange noise and, having ear protection and using equipment. I kept thinking to myself, what is going on? Is the equipment failing or something? And come to find out, after clearing a path, one of the guys calls me back and lets me know that I've gone by 2 different rattlesnakes who are now rattling and quite kind of ornery as I pass by. So again, all from a NOV and dealing with it with the customer, but that's what businesses like Aqualis do. But again, NOVs will always be near and dear to my heart, and always have a soft spot for them, just thinking back on those experiences. So again, we're going to get in to discussing about NOVs, and really the meat and potatoes of this presentation is I want you guys to walk away with, understanding what an NOV is, the types of NOVs that you can receive, and some of the action steps to take when you do receive an NOV. And we'll talk about some real world examples. And before we get into those items, I want to give everybody a baseline that's on to really get a baseline of what is stormwater, what are some of these assets that an inspector in an NOV is going to point out. We'll go over those briefly. I'll show you some pictures and some examples of things. But that should give everybody a baseline, and a lot of these things should be very familiar. We may not know the names or exactly what they do, but I think you're going to come away with a little bit of better understanding today. We're also going to learn about your O&M agreement, your operation and maintenance agreement. This is basically the agreement when your property was built or developed that you agreed to with the municipality on what is supposed to be done. So obviously, we want to avoid NOVs, and the best way to do that is understand your own O&M agreements and comply with those basic understandings and things. So without further ado, we'll get it kicked off on some of the stormwater basics. And again, just a quirky drawing about, the basics of stormwater. And we thought this was prevalent because obviously you've got runoff from buildings, you've got runoff from parking lots, and all of these things have either some potential harmful pollutants that can run into the storm system, whether it be gasoline, trash, sediment. This is a constant battle with the stormwater system. And I like this slide in particular because I think a lot of people, including myself before I got into the stormwater world, we kind of forget about the stormwater. Kind of once it hits that drain and starts going down to where we can't see it anymore, I think the public tends to forget about it unless things are flooded. And what I learned real quickly in the stormwater world is where that water eventually flows and how it gets there is just as important. As you can see in this slide, the storm drains discharging into the county stream, into a river, and into a major watershed at Chesapeake Bay. And again, these are areas where people recreate, people get food, swim, fish. And so very important that we make sure we do what we can as stewards of the land, stewards of our property, to make sure the water we're flushing down, basically the system, for lack of a better term, is is of high quality and managed the way it's supposed to be and how we've agreed to. Continuing on, that diagram also was a good, and this one as well, with stormwater runoff. You know, in the early 70s, the United States basically realized that this runoff and all this development needs to be managed. And so they came up with the Clean Water Act in 1972, and it was updated in the year 2000 with the phase 2 of the Clean Water Act. And this basically is stating that any land disturbance or any development of 1 acre or more is basically required to comply and to manage their stormwater runoff. There's some standard minimums to remain in compliance, but it's definitely something that the EPA and the United States government has put a great importance on, and it's something that we need to be aware of. And this is just not something that's made up. This is something that we're all relying on, and the government is pushing that compliance down the local municipalities. And so it's very important. I do want to point out, like, we're going to get into some acronyms and we're going to get into different terms. One on this page, MS4, it basically stands for your municipal separate stormwater system, sewer system. So we got the municipal and the 4 S's of separate storm sewer system. You might run across that in an NOV. It's basically the discharge area maintained by the municipality of where, you know, stormwater might run into. But again, there must be designed and adhere to minimum standards to be in compliance. As we move forward, we're going to get into, again, more acronyms. You will, if you ever receive an NOV, see acronyms like BMP or SCM. And really those acronyms are one and the same. A BMP always kind of tripped me up. It's a best management practice. And it always tripped me up with the word practices in there, describing some kind of action. But really that means it could be a thing. It could be a catch basin. It can be a pond. And so I love the updated language of stormwater control measure. It gives me a better feeling in my simple mind of what we're talking about and what that asset is to control the stormwater or convey it to wherever it needs to flow downstream. So you're going to, again, see these acronyms a lot in pages and NOV letters. So a good understanding. Just know that they're one and the same, and they're referring to the assets on your sites. And we'll start to review some of these as we move forward here. That either collect and convey and also ultimately discharge this rainwater. So as we get into stormwater control measures, we're going to get into some more pictures. Obviously a couple pictures on the right of a retention pond and an underground system, but the items listed here are very common types. A lot of you probably dealing with these on your properties. As I speak here, and really these, 7 or 8 examples here are examples of kind of the end use of where stormwater might run to in your property. There's definitely some SCMs that convey that stormwater to get there, but things like retention ponds, these are the actual ponds most commonly that are retaining water. You'll also hear the word and the SCM detention pond. And detention ponds are basically same kind of thing, but are really meant to detain the water for a certain amount of time before it's either infiltrates into the ground or that gets conveyed out to the MS4. So a good kind of place to start in some of the language. Nowadays, with the importance of environmental push and stewardship of the land, you've got things like sand filters, which kind of naturally filter stormwater through a bed of sand. Grass swales convey bioretention cells are very popular up here in the northern Midwest, quite a few around the Minneapolis area. And we'll get into a little bit more of that, but know that these are all SCMs, and these are very common for kind of in use on the property or where that stormwater is going to end up. Now, as we think about these in-use systems and these SCMs where the stormwater is going to eventually reside on your property, we think about two things: water quality and water quantity. Both of these can be an issue regarding stormwater and SCMs, and could trigger a notice of violation. Obviously, this is an actual picture on the right of a business that we were doing work for, a customer of ours, during a heavy rain event, having this much flooding in their garden center. So you can, obviously not good for business, impacting customers and guests going in and out of the store. So all very important to make sure this thing is functioning. And obviously you can see on the left, the water quality example. That water doesn't look very good there in that pond. And we'll get into some of the pollutants and things that the Clean Water Act defines on the next page here. So we talk about pollutants and all the things that can affect water quality and a little bit of water quantity as well. But these are all things that are defined by the EPA and the Clean Water Act. We're going to start with trash and debris. Negatively impacts living organisms, can clog up inlets and outlets. I will say one of the most common places where trash and debris collects in a lot of our customers, at least in the retail world, are your ponds, your basins, your detention basins. Loading docks are a very popular place where just trash, everyday use, is going to collect. Stormwater is typically ultimately running there. And it's something that you need to stay on top of to make sure those eventual drains and outlets are free and clear. Another big thing that the EPA points out are nutrients. Anything that is in the water that can promote algae growth. I know recently, as of a year or two ago down in Florida, you've got the Everglades system, watershed system down there, and they were having, I even think it was impacting the oceans with this strange like red algae growth, and a lot of that at times that is contributed from the nutrients that's being run off. Some fertilizers and different things can impact, and obviously algae. We get alerts up here in Minnesota during the summer, in the middle of the summer, when the water gets stagnant with some of the algae growth on our lakes, even preventing and causing beaches to close on some of our recreational lakes. So it's important we know what those are and how that can be affect the system. We've got things like sediment. As defined, sediment can be a lot of things that are flowing throughout the stormwater property or your property via the stormwater. Sediment is almost unavoidable. There's always going to be dirt and rocks and things collected where this stormwater is running to. And sediment's very important. It can impact some of the places that convey this stormwater, and ultimately if sediment collects too much in an area where stormwater is meant to infiltrate the ground, it takes some rehab and some work to make sure that soil and everything can be accept that stormwater and filter it naturally. So it's a big one that we run into often. Heavy metals, we've got parking lots, we've got trucks, hydraulic systems, trash compactors, all that stuff have potential to release heavy metals in the environment. Obviously, I think it's pretty apparent how these wouldn't be good for living organisms, or nobody wants gas or diesel in their water dealing with that. Bacteria, animal waste, sewage, this not meant for the stormwater system. And we're going to come to an example at the end of the presentation today about animal waste and bacteria and how serious that can be, and how a business had to deal with that, some serious consequences in what they were releasing. And then finally, we get into chemicals, very toxic to living organisms. Again, we're getting into the pesticides and herbicides that we can use. We got to be real careful Not to saying that we can't use any pesticide or herbicide on a stormwater pond. In fact, you can, and it is a good practice if you've got invasive species like plants or some kinds of algae, but we got to make sure those chemicals are safe for the stormwater system, and that's where a stormwater professional is going to have that knowledge and experience to make sure you as a property manager or owner are following the guidelines and putting the right things into your systems. So we've talked about the type of pollutants. Now I want to get into basically the SCM, the stormwater control measure, the structures, and these are very common ones. Actually skipped a slide there. Very common ones that you might have on your property. Again, up in the upper left here is an idea of a detention pond. This is a low-lying area, basically a pond without water, often vegetated, like you see there. This one in particular has a concrete flume in the bottom of it. Stormwater would enter the system on the inlet side of this, which I believe is up here just past the crew member working. That stormwater can flow down this flume without eroding the pond itself and just kind of infiltrate and collect in this detention pond. And really detention ponds are most of the time are meant to collect that rainwater and let it infiltrate into the ground. Our experience is a lot of the times, and this can be noted in an NOV as well, that water should infiltrate within a certain period of time. I think often it's 72 hours after a certain quantity of rain has fell, that inspectors and O&M agreements will kind of point out that they want to see that water infiltrate. So definitely something to note and to be aware of if you know you have a detention pond and you get a rain event and that water's lasting for a week or two, there definitely might be an issue with that. Over here on the right, we have a grass swale, usually a natural conveyance system, often receiving rainwater and then moving it via gravity to either a pond or retention or detention pond. Sometimes, like in the desert Southwest, there are a lot of swales around retail centers because things absorb so quickly in the desert, and rain is not often happening unless certain times of the year. You can get away with a smaller management. You can see this swale wouldn't have the volume quite that this detention pond would be able to hold, but again, typically in the upper Midwest, as is probably shown in here, used to convey the stormwater to the ultimate destination point. Bottom left here, we've got an example of a bioretention cell. This is often called a rain garden. Same thing I guess the same concept as a detention pond, but often a little bit more natural features within the soil. In the bottom is often a sandy loam type soil, and it's constructed in a manner where you do not want to compact any of that soil. You want the rainwater running through this curb cut down these little riprap flumes and basically collecting in a series. Typically a property would have a series of these bioretention cells throughout the property, collecting naturally. A lot of times there's natural vegetation planted within cells, whether it's shrubbery. In this case, there's some kind of oak tree planted, some shrubs, but that shrubbery and trees typically choke out the invasive species that like to grow in things like this. Again, very important that I do want to stress the importance of having a qualified stormwater service provider working with you, because these are very specialized. We need to be aware of, you don't want to run heavy equipment in here. You don't want to do a whole lot of tracking in the lower end of these, because that's where the stormwater is meant to infiltrate, and we don't want to compact those areas down. So again, just be aware that all these features are designed a certain way, and having a qualified inspector or service provider on your side only helps. Lastly, down here in the bottom right, we've got an example of a retention pond. Again, probably very common on a lot of your properties, again, meant to retain water and hold it when that water reaches a certain level, is typically discharged through an outlet of some kind into the MS4 or along down the line. Here's an example of some of the conveyance structures that would lead stormwater to some of the ponds and bioretention cells. Just a concrete flume. I know everybody's probably seen catch basins or drop inlets throughout parking lots. You notice the curb inlets down here on the bottom right. Even example of permeable pavement, very common in the Carolinas, very common in areas with sandy or loamy soil underneath. Again, all of these are very critical to the stormwater system, but also, very critical to watch out for, possible failures. Concrete flumes can crack, and the water, if it's not running down this concrete flume, it's cutting into the soil and causing erosion and sediment that's ultimately flowing out. Catch basins and curb inlets, very common, especially in areas where it freezes and thaws, to have sinkholes around them. The water draining into these structures during heavy rain events almost create a vacuum. So if anything on the inside of these structures is compromised, the water would like to, the water almost acts like as a vacuum, sucking out the undersoil under some of this pavement and causing these areas to sink. Even the permeable pavement, sediment is going to want to collect in these. It's unavoidable. And so there are some very specific maintenance items to make sure that pavement remains, keeps its ability to absorb that rainwater and collect it and do what it's designed to do. Again, continuing on with some of the SCMs, trench drains are our favorite, very common in the retail customers that we deal with. And as you can see in this one, these things are absolute magnet for sediment, and you can imagine everything, how severely sloped it is in a loading dock to get those trucks and everything to be able to make their deliveries, but very easily compacted. These trench drains are typically only about 6 to 8 inches deep, and very easily fill up with rainwater. So we definitely want to stay on top of those things. Make sure the customer can continue with their deliveries. Other items like head walls, flared in sections, basically these are designed in such a manner to limit the amount of possible issues around them. You can see where this water eventually flows out, especially in this flared in section as this one's being actually constructed. You just want to minimize that erosion and possible issues that can flare up with these. So now that we kind of have a basic understanding of some of the items that might be on our properties, we want to get into the O&M agreements. Again, the operation and maintenance agreement. And this is basically your document that each property has, and it's usually on file with the municipality, about what exactly you're supposed to do at your property. And before we kind of get into some examples of O&M agreements, I want to show, I thought this was a great slide to show that these properties, as they're designed by people and engineers way smarter than I am, but I can't tell you what all this on the right means, but I can tell you that a lot of thought and planning goes into the stormwater system. It's just not, let's dig a pond and let's have a couple of catch basins to get it there. There's a lot of, again, thought and planning. These plans have to be approved by the municipality upon construction. As you can see here on the right, an engineer's drawing up possible runoff calculations based on the acreage of the tract being developed. Kind of this is the overall shot of on the left of the tract being developed. And you're basically, an engineer's plan is to kind of draw up for a worst case scenario. In a worst case scenario this year, in this example, a 25-year, 5-minute storm. So that means once in 25 years, a storm like this would happen. That he or she is basically coming up with the calculations in designing a stormwater system that can handle that load of water. The last thing we want is especially nowadays where it seems like these infrequent rain events or these 25-year storms or 100-year floods that I feel like I used to hear about when I was a kid that literally only happened, once every 25 years. It just seems like nowadays that these things are happening every 2 or 3 years. And so we want our systems able to handle that. I often, when I talk to customers, we don't think a whole lot about our stormwater systems until the parking lot's flooded or the store is starting to flood and everything. But we want to ensure that those items are in good shape and can handle these, these occurrences when a big storm comes. I think there's, as we speak right now, there's another hurricane developing in the Gulf heading up, towards Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi. I know they've been dealing with another one that came through early. Florida the same way. Imperative that we stay on top, understand, kind of our systems, keep them in good shape, because these types of occurrences seem to be happening more and more. So when we talk about O&M plans, based on those approved site plans that we just saw on the last slide, the municipality will basically come up with an agreement with the property developer, the eventual property owner, on how that system should be maintained and/or what needs to be reported to the city or municipality to make sure you're taking care of it. I look at these bullet points right here on the going down the page is kind of the who, what, and where. Who is responsible? What are we responsible for? And where are these assets? Sometimes, we've ran into customers that have ponds that are actually responsible for ponds that are across streets and a quarter mile from their actual building. But it's part of the easement. It's part of the O&M agreement that they agreed to upon developing the property. So very important we understand those. And these are typically on file with the municipality in the internet age that we all live in now. Usually it maybe take a phone call or a little bit of internet time, but we can find it. And the first step is kind of know what we're responsible for and know what the expectations are. On the right here, we've got an example of this. Is an actual example from a customer of ours on an O&M agreement. This example, as you read through this, and especially as you get the slides after the presentation, you can kind of read through this in more detail, but very, very detailed. And we like this as stormwater providers, a company like Aqualis, we like the more detail and the more we know about what's expected, the better. And the more we can make sure those items are taken care of and the customer and everybody's in compliance. As we go through this, when you can see, they talk about, here's your acronym SCM. They talk about the perimeter of the basin, the inlet devices. Again, very specific example. I will say, and I did want to note that a lot of this work is handled, a lot of our customers have both stormwater providers and landscapers. I know a cutoff that we typically use in a lot of our customers' worlds is basically the top of the berm of the pond, or if a pond is typically retention ponds have fences around them, but anything inside the fence, or if it's a detention basin or something that's not fenced, kind of the top of that berm is where kind of stormwater starts and landscaping ends, and vice versa when you're coming out. We'll get into some later examples about, the advantage it is to have a qualified stormwater provider like Aqualis on site helping you out. A lot of it looks like landscaping, but again, a lot of the times our guys are kind of weeding through the vegetation and the trash, and in order to look for some of the important things like inlets and outlets and erosion and things like that. So again, a great example through these next couple of slides about exact responsibilities for this particular property owner, outlets, embankments, receiving water, what it should look like. Again, very, very great example. And I will say that this example is probably on the extreme, I don't want to necessarily say high quality, but the extreme detail end of things. I would say a majority, or at least half of our O&M agreements that we come across on properties basically will outline, hey, we want you to inspect the property every so often, quarterly, once a year, repair any deficiencies, and basically send us a report that you've done the work. Very, very simple most of the time. But again, we wanted to show you kind of an example from one end of the extreme to the other. So here we go. Notices of violation. Again, the purpose of this is how to act, respond, and prevent these notices of violation moving forward. You know, we've taken the steps. We kind of know what's on our site. We know what a SCM is now. We know what our expectations are because we've reviewed our operations and maintenance manuals and expectations. And what if we're, you know, thrust into a position where we have to handle one, or sometimes things slip through the crack and we get a notice of violation. So we'll start to get into how to handle some of that stuff. First of all, what is a notice of violation? I'm just going to read this verbatim. Notice of violation is an official notification to inform a non-compliant property owner or manager of a violation in relation to stormwater management. This notice will typically detail when the inspection took place. It may include items about fines and penalties. Often those items about fines and penalties are a warning, at least the first time. And it basically says you're responsible, as you took ownership of that property, you're responsible for knowing what's required of you. Again, all can be found in the particular O&M agreement. And oftentimes they contain a reminder of the basics of stormwater management. On the right here, this is just a generic example that we've drawn up. We've seen a lot of these, and we're going to get into some very specific actual letters from cities here in a second. But really, you can notate throughout this page is kind of this first paragraph describes what took place, you know, what the inspector did, their findings. That's kind of in the middle here. And then basically the last is an action item. And those action items often have timelines associated with them. So very important to notate the date that the letter was given to you or filed with the particular municipality. And very important to kind of look through that NOV and know what's expected of you. So as we move forward, there's two different types of NOVs, typically on the stormwater side of things. One is during construction. During construction, as you may have noticed, you might see particular items like silt fences around a property as it's being developed, straw wattles. You'll see large rocks where the equipment's coming in and out of the road to prevent track out prevention. Definitely need to have a plan on file with basically your construction permits. Need to include a stormwater pollution prevention plan. But most of our audience today, as property managements, property owners are dealing with this NOVs that would happen to happen after construction. We're given a property. We're thrust into a role that now we need to manage some of these things. So the types of NOVs that we would most likely see are after construction. I would say the most common in this list here is a failure to maintain or repair your SCMs, and literally a failure to conduct and document inspections. Super simple items, very, usually depending on the type of system you have, very cost effective to get the maintenance or an inspection done. Really low cost. And again, it's just a failure of doing some of those are the very most common that we run into and help customers with. We did, over the next couple of slides, want to include some examples of what an inspector might see along a property, or something that you might notice, even, hopefully before an inspector might pick up on what's required, and typically always going to be out of compliance regarding your O&M agreement. But some very common ones that we run across throughout the country. We've got some examples of, you've got a swale with overgrowth of excessive vegetation. A lot of O&M agreements will have even specific height that they want the vegetation maintained at. Down here in the bottom right, we've got an area where inlet is coming into a pond. You see the big chunk rock, the riprap here heading out to the right. But here on the left, you've got a lot of cutting into the bank. What happens is a lot of this stormwater will rush into this area with a lot of velocity on it. And if this whole area doesn't have some rock over it, or something to kind of dissipate that velocity of the water coming in, it's just going to start cutting into the bank. Obviously, all that sediment is running into the water there. It's filling up your pond for less capacity. It's providing a sediment as a known pollutant according to the EPA that they don't want running into stormwater. So something that's very common that we see, that's easily identifiable as you're looking around your property. A little bit more here, hidden here in the bottom left, is erosion from in a vegetated area. And up here in the upper left, we even run in things like this, but I mean, this is a beaver doing what beavers do, clog, waterways to make themselves a little sanctuary and everything. But this is all contributing to, the system not being able to function as designed. And really, one of the things I wanted to highlight on this slide was, as we think about solutions, it'd be pretty easy to run in here and grab all these sticks and move them out of the way and call it good. But I always feel like the beavers are just waiting for you to do that, because they can't wait to get back to work and do it all over again. So finding that root cause of some of these activities and some of these deficiencies that you're running across is kind of where a stormwater professional like Aqualis could come in and make sure we're finding those root causes, and those items aren't happening in the future. Next slide. Some more examples of kind of out of compliance items. We got this pond here. You got the fence. It's a retention pond. We got a fenced area. You can see all of the trees, the invasive trees, and I call them invasive just because typically trees like that, embankments, aren't planted. If they are, they're planted very, uniformly and neatly. There's certain types of trees like willows and cottonwoods, especially in some areas of the country, that tend to grow in these wetter than normal areas. I could probably drive by this location and tell you that pond hasn't been touched in a while. Just again, regarding the growth around it, we have things in the upper right like invasive species. Here we've got a flared in section that kind of some undercutting is going on with the water flowing out. We've got trash and debris, a lot of the areas of the country. I know a lot of our customers have to deal with just people coming by and dumping stuff into their low areas of their ponds. So continuing on, those are some examples of, what you might see, what an inspector might see. And the inspector themselves, this slide is really meant, again, the EPA pushes the enforcement to the local jurisdiction most times. And an NOV can be issued just after a general inspection, or maybe a complaint by the general public. If you've got a pond that's overgrown or some kind of apparent thing that the public might see on your property, it might trigger an inspection. But really, inspectors, they're normally great people. They're not out to get anybody. I use the word "get" in quotations, or get anyone or any business. Basically, their role is to make sure the public has entrusted them to make sure the businesses in their jurisdiction are complying with, the stormwater the stormwater requirements, and we're all, as just people general living in towns and in different municipalities, we're all end users of basically where the stormwater runs into, either directly or indirectly. So the inspectors are just out to do their jobs, make sure businesses and property owners are complying to what's agreed upon. Very reasonable. A lot of the times we're going to get into some slides moving forward about communication, but very reasonable people. Typically, as long as you're communicating and they understand that you've received the letter, you are putting an action plan in place. They're very reasonable and will typically agree to the timing, even if you're over the actual timing on the letter. So again, great people, not meant to get anybody, pick on anybody in particular, just doing their job. So I wanted to get in over the next 3 slides, or the next few slides, about some real world examples that we've helped customers out on. And these excerpts from these are actual excerpts from the NOVs that they were issued. And these examples kind of show the potential of the cost in some of these, and how enlisting a stormwater professional can help, and how having that plan and that understanding of your systems can literally help save you dollars down the road. But in this example, we had a hospitality location. They were actually failing, again, a very common one, failing to submit their maintenance logs and their inspection requirements for the last few years. Had an inspection in 2019 that had some failures to it. I think the client kind of took it upon themselves, said, hey, we'll get this taken care of. Failed to do that, failed to enlist the help, the proper help. And basically, once the inspection was done again, the inspector in the NOV letter says basically, hey, none of the things you told me we're going to get done are done. Here's a list of all that needs to be done, and here are the potential fine opportunities. It's $300 fine, there's court costs, hearing costs, and up to $1,000 a day. So it's real money that could be going out the door. And I know you, as property managers and business owners and property owners, any unavoidable costs or avoidable costs, I should say, that we can just, takes a little time, a little understanding. These are real dollars that'll help the business, help the property out. That could be a potential, it's real money that you have the potential to be dealing with or be fined. Continuing with this example, very simple items. This inspector came by. Item number 1, he's just noticing some excessive sediment as the rainwater collects in this parking lot, and basically through natural flow is going to hit this rock area, which slows it down before it eventually filters into this grass area for infiltration. Sediment throughout the parking lot is just starting to build up through here in these red circled and rectangular areas. Simply couldn't get this port. A lot of times this happens with catch basin grates. Sometimes their sediment gets in between the grate itself and the lip of the grate, and they get seized and they can't lift it up to even inspect. So again, very simple thing that can be, oftentimes you hit it with we've hit them with a sledgehammer and it'll loosen it up and be able to pop it out. But very, very simple things. The bottom right here, we've got some kind of drop inlet or catch basin. This is designed this end is basically meant to handle the water load. You can see all the sediment build up there in the circled area. That sediment typically will sink in the stormwater, and when the stormwater reaches a certain level and is able to reach this inlet here to the ultimate stormwater pipe leading out of the system, that's kind of how this system is designed to keep that sediment from going out. Obviously, if we don't clean this out after a certain period of time, we can run into issues, and that's what the inspector noted here. Here's a quick issue, not necessarily so stormwater related, but as a customer of ours reached out, they've got a notice of violation for retaining wall failure. A great example of communication in this one. This retaining wall was long and it was old and there were trees, and a real expensive fix if you were going to fix the entire thing and replace. But a simple call to the inspector here basically said, hey, all I really want is this stuff off that sidewalk. So we were able to kind of clean that up, and the customer was getting a solution to their issue for a lot less than basically what the language actually said, replacement or repair. So again, communication is key, and we'll come back to that. Here's a simple inspection or an example of an NOV basically given by someone not completing their inspections. It's a second notice. Again, it kind of goes through all the things that you'll be able to see once we get a chance to review the slides, pointing out exactly when the timeline starts, what's due. But again, something as simple as, typically an inspection of your stormwater system is just a few $100 that could have been avoided, and just one less thing to deal with as a property manager or owner. So going through those, really the nuts and bolts of this and what you can take away is the kind of the NOV timeline and action steps. If anything, we kind of want to review these in kind of a step-by-step manner. Step one, read the NOV carefully, refer to your O&M plan, know it. Step two, basically kind of three parts. You want to respond and let the inspector and the regulatory body know you've received. You need to consult stormwater professionals if you don't have the ability yourself to take care of the issue. And number three, within step two, is develop that action plan. Once you have an action plan or consulted with a stormwater professional, always best to run that action plan by the regulatory body and see if they agree. Communication being key there. Obviously, step four, we're going to complete that action plan. And step five, ultimately, we're going to complete and we're going to follow up with the regulatory body with a report and or a phone call. Always following up with some kind of email. If it's a phone call, making sure it's in writing that, hey, we've repaired, we've taken care of your issues, and you're good with it. And I say you as far as the inspector, and have that, make sure you get that reply from the inspector saying, yes, we're good. Moving forward, we know what's going on, and won't get those again. So pretty simple steps. Again, one of the main items to take away there is communication. Never can communicate too much. So we, pretty simple, but again, follow those steps. You should be in good standing with dealing with an NOV. As we get into these last few slides, I know we're going to get pressed on time. I'm going to kind of go quickly, but most of these are a example of, this one's a communication example where an NOV came in. This particular customer has a designed wetland that they need to maintain and make sure it's up to snuff. It wasn't, just some communication was able to relieve the inspector, know that they're taking care of it, and actually got basically a year and a half to take care of this problem due to certain vegetation that needs to grow within this designed wetland. An easy one. Here's an example where a property owner had a brand new property, did not put any type of maintenance plan or inspection plan in place upon development of the property. Would have been very cost effective to do so at roughly about $1,400 per year. After 12 months of doing nothing, an inspector came by, noted some deficiencies like erosion. We got invasive species. We got overgrowth. The cost to get this property back in compliance was about $13,500. Would have been all taken care of during routine maintenance visits under about $1,400 per year. So you can kind of see how cost effective some of this is. This next example is one of the most extreme that we've run across. Basically, we had a customer, a grocer, that was only doing inspections and no preventative maintenance, failed an inspection. engaged with us in a landscaping company to fix the issues. Ended up going with the cheaper option with the landscaping company. And because I think of their lack of knowledge and not being qualified in stormwater services and what's expected, basically their fix failed, and the property failed an inspection again and would be fined $2,500 a day. We were able to come in, provide a repair solution ultimately for $17,000. And so you can see this is real world dollars that this grocer had to pay on one site. And who knows how that can affect, that business in particular at year end. But basically a large majority of this could have been avoidable. I know the maintenance program was probably a more intense one for this particular site, but again, a lot more cost effective than going through the repairs and the fines. Again, engaged us, got onto a stormwater maintenance program and passed their 2020 inspection with flying colors. And as I finish up here, one example that was in the news recently, Churchill Downs, basically you can see going through this, their O&M agreement was violated over 250 times through about a 6-year period, basically discharging water that contained all kinds of horse wash and different items that might come out of a horse over time. And they had to basically comply with the local jurisdiction to correct their system, which cost them a good amount of money. But really the civil penalty for all this discharge into a major watershed system like down in New Orleans with the Louisiana Delta, almost $3 million that could have been avoided by just knowing what they can do and complying. So as we finish up here, as this one says, it's no simpler than this. The best way to handle an NOV is to avoid them. And to avoid them, you got to know your O&M agreement, consult with a partner or a stormwater management provider like an Aqualis that can come in, get you on a good program. Communication, can't stress that enough. Communication with your stormwater provider, communication with the regulatory body. That maintenance program is going to help avoid costly fines and make sure you get that scheduled inspection and it's delivered to the regulatory body. And ultimately, you can be proud that your business or your property is making an impact as a private citizen that each of us are. You're ultimately, doing good for again, your direct and indirect use of the water, the runoff. So it's there's a lot going on with these. Here's a quick slide in regards to what a preventative maintenance and inspection program can look like. Again, a lot of it's very similar to landscaping, but these stormwater professionals on the right-hand side, basically clearing that vegetation in order to make sure the system can function as designed. They're looking for problems like erosion, like failures. And so very, very cost effective to develop a program and a maintenance and inspection program and get that information to the regulatory body. Then finally, we'll go through questions. I think there's a handful of questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Amy here. But again, we appreciate you joining today. Aqualis is a nationwide provider of stormwater and lift station maintenance and repairs. We're a nationwide provider using a lot of our own people. And if there's any questions or anything, we'll get back to all the questions and answers as we go through these. But if anybody has any questions or in need of anything, you can consult us for a free consultation. We'd love to take a look and help you out. And chances are we're helping other customers in your area out already and could be of good value to you. So again, appreciate everybody's time today, bearing with me through the presentation, and hopefully you got a little something out of it, learned a little bit of something about stormwater. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Amy.
Great. Thanks, Jeff, for that excellent presentation. And we do already have several questions coming in through the Q&A portal, so feel free to type in your questions for Jeff, and we'll get through as many as we can. Jeff, there's a few questions about some of the photos you showed of things that might be in violation. One of them is, did you say if there's trash at the bottom of a dry retention pond that could be an NOV?
It could be if an inspector happens to see it. Ponds are they're just so easily, obviously everything's flowing there. Wind across parking lots are going to blow things around, and trash in your ponds can definitely be something that an inspector would notice. It's just important to maintain those items. You don't want trash clogging up outlets to your ponds or any of your catch basins or anything like that. So again, stressing the importance of the maintenance program and partnering with a qualified stormwater inspection company like Aqualis can only help. And part of our job is going to get that trash out of there every month or every visit and make sure that system is functioning as designed.
Great. And another one along those lines is somebody was just asking for a little bit more clarification on why excess vegetation in a swale was a problem, or just excess growth of vegetation in general.
Within the pond?
This one, so he was just saying, yes, in a pond or a swale, he says he understands it. If it blocks water flow, it might be an issue, but otherwise it increases filtering and shades to water to reduce thermal pollution.
Yeah, it just depends. A lot of the growth that starts to happen in ponds is technically invasive. Cattails, things like that. Every jurisdiction is going to be a little bit more lenient on certain things. Up here in Minnesota, quite actually, cattails are pretty common in our ponds, and they do provide a filtering process. But as sediment and things build up in that pond, those things are going to die off typically every year, or some aquatic vegetation does, and it can start to impact the basic design of your pond. And so you got to want to keep a close eye on that. And again, every jurisdiction is a little bit different. Some don't want any cattails at all, or invasive species like that. So it kind of calls for how your property is designed and what the original O&M and design parameters were, and kind of making sure you're complying along those lines.
Great. We had another question on how violations or NOVs are different for federal facilities. Do they have the same
facilities? Is that what you said? I'm sorry.
Yeah, at federal facilities that are owned by the federal government.
Now, that's a good question, and we might need to get back to that question in regards to a specific answer. But I know federal buildings or sometimes municipal work and how that relates to the same regulatory bodies. I'm not quite sure. Typically, we're dealing with more private, either retail or HOAs, property management groups and stuff like that are responsible for more private assets. But again, let me look into that, and I'll get back to that question for sure.
Sure. Great. We had another question on, is it the responsibility of the property owner or the tenant to maintain and file the paperwork with the authorities for stormwater?
Well, that is, every place is a little bit different, but typically what we run into almost on a nationwide basis, that stormwater in particular typically falls back on the property owner. A lot of times lessees or renters of properties deal with kind of the building envelope and what's within. I would say a lot of that's defined in the lease agreement, but I would say more often than not, we're dealing with the actual property owner or the property developer, most times even with a customer that just leases a store. So I would definitely make sure that owner or developer knows and it's clear in the lease agreement and knows that regulation to make sure that is that's filed, because I would imagine it's ultimately going to fall on the wherever that property is listed in the municipality's records, and oftentimes that is the owner. That's where that letter might end up or might be ultimately responsible on the municipality side.
Great. Another question on what are some of the methods that municipalities use to set stormwater rates?
As far as fines or runoff, or
That was,
I'm not sure what I know what rates mean.
yeah,
Maybe
that
that's
was
a question we can come back to.
full question. So yeah, Dennis, if you want to add anything to your, type in another question, we can get back to that one. So someone was just asking about salt from snow removal and how that plays into is that a concern in stormwater?
It can be, yes. Salt, a good example of that. I mean, it's going to be used in parking lots. I know nowadays they're trying to design different salts and additives to melt snow and ice that are a little bit more environmentally friendly. One thing that we typically deal with, especially up here in Minnesota, plenty of snow, obviously every winter, and plenty of salt being laid down and sand and things. But ultimately, that's going to run off into your stormwater ponds. It oftentimes runs into the areas with the biofiltration that I spoke about earlier, the rain gardens. And these features are, you know, a little bit more expensive than the regular pond to develop and maintain. And it basically creates a harsh environment for the plants trying to grow. If it's a rain garden and you have established plants in there that are supposed to be there, and ultimately where that water runs into ponds, it can provide a harsh environment for some of the animals and things. But salt, since it's a naturally occurring thing, and it's pretty easy to have that filtered out. I know that the systems are designed to kind of take that on, but it's something to be aware of. And again, we often run into it up here in Minnesota with it. You know, if there's too much or there's too much direct dumping on snow piling on some of these stormwater assets, what we run into up here, it can kind of take a beating on the vegetation that's supposed to be there and ultimately needs to be replaced. So something to be aware of for sure.
Great. Another question that came in is, what specific documentation should a facility manager or building owner request when they take over ownership of that new property in terms of maintenance?
I would definitely ask for the O&M agreement, operations and maintenance agreement. If that property is over 1 acre in size, there should be something on file with the municipality regarding what the requirements on, and that's your absolute best resource to reach out and know those expectations. If something's not on file, typically on the regulatory website, there'll kind of be a general expectation of property owners. A lot of times, again, it's pretty simple, just inspections and or, you know, fixes. But again, that information is online, and best to reach out to the regulatory body and they can help you find it.
Jeff, how often are those plans updated on a typical basis? Is that something anytime you have any, you know, major construction or renovation you need to update, or is that something that every 5 years it gets reevaluated?
I would say as properties are developed, typically when they're zoned and the initial plans are being directed, they kind of have an idea of what eventually might be there, even if just one building starts out. That one building might have a gigantic pond in the back, and you would think, well, for the one building it's overkill, but they're planning on the rest of the area that's been zoned for development around it to eventually get there. There are instances where as you develop a property, especially if areas are being rezoned and added to that, where the stormwater discharge permit needs to be updated. So a lot of times if you're doing any developing or adding to property, just kind of checking back on those original plans, those drainage plans would be a good resource. I know we get a lot of requests as a company to hey, come in here, let's add a catch basin here, let's, we're getting flooding, we need a pond over there, and it's just not as simple as adding what we want, where we want. We've got to, number one, consult the right people, get an engineering firm or our own engineers involved, and then you got to apply for that permit and make sure that jives with what the city and the municipality has put in place.
Great. Jeff, you mentioned kind of the 25-year storms that are becoming a little bit more frequent these days. Have you seen any changes that the municipalities want building owners or property managers or owners to change within their stormwater plans because of the frequency of some of these large storms?
Yeah, great question. I wouldn't say necessarily there's so much change. I do think there's an emphasis on actually complying and making sure it's being done. I know we've dealt with some customers down in the Houston area, and they had a big hurricane a couple years ago come through, and it's, just talking through with things with them and just how much it's being stressed now compared to years past, because when that one hit and they had however 50 inches of rain or whatever it was, that's more like a 1 in 1,000 year storm. But I think it's just being stressed more rather than changed, by the municipalities, making sure people are in compliance and maintaining these areas and getting those inspections in, and again, communicating is one of the most key parts there.
Great, and just I think we're rounding out the questions here. Do you anticipate any future EPA regulation changes in the near term?
I don't. I mean, it's hard to say. Who knows? I know different, as legislation gets passed through, we've got different terms in presidents and pushes, from the top down. It's just hard to say what might change. Again, I do feel like the trend in things is this is becoming more apparent. It's becoming more on people's minds. It's being, and those trends are basically being looked after a little bit more closely by the municipalities, and what was once maybe seemingly only, maybe the biggest, real estate owners in your area are getting inspected or watched closely. I feel the trend has been, just about everybody with the information age that we're in and the availability of information and how it's filed now. Even over the last 10 years, it's just easily for an inspector to know what's required, track those requirements and see who's up to snuff. So I can't anticipate any changes. I think that's up in the air, but definitely seems to be on more people's minds, that's for sure.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. I'll let you say any final comments or thoughts to the audience at this point.
No, I appreciate everybody tuning in and hanging in with me today. Again, these NOVs, really this presentation is just meant to provide you with some good knowledge and action plans. And regarding the NOVs, they're actually pretty simple and easy to take care of. Enlisting that stormwater professional to help you out absolutely never hurts. And so I appreciate everybody tuning in. Hopefully you got something out of it. And again, everybody stay healthy and everything going into the winter here, and just let us know how we can help.
Great. Thank you again, Jeff. We really appreciate this excellent presentation. Just a reminder, you will receive an email with the slides used today, and today's event will be archived at facilitiesnet.com/webcast. So you can go, starting tomorrow, you can go take a look at the presentation again in its archived format. But thank you again to Jeff. We appreciate you joining us today, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.